had started doing Afrobeats events in the West Coast, California to be exact. We were doing Two-Face concerts, P-Square concerts. Throughout that whole period, I never thought about it as community. We used to think about it as party. And it wasn't until I met E in 2016 and he says, this is community building. This is like a skill set. When you look at from 2009 to like 2022 when we raised, you're talking about like 12 plus years. And I started at like 18. When you're not going to look back at that track record, you're saying, no, this is somebody who was there when cancellations from Wizkid, cancellations from Burna Boy, went bankrupt multiple times. I've seen shaky in this business.
People have seen the headlines. Afropolitan raised $2.4 million. But what they haven't heard is the real story. The long nights, the pivots, the critics who called us crazy, and the belief that kept us moving when no one else could see it.
You need to have audacity like Oyibo Man. What's his name from WeWork failed miserably with WeWork, and then he went in hiding, came back, and raised capital again. I had a phone call with Elizabeth Yin, Hustle Fund. We did the pitch, and she said, look, I'm taking a big chance on you. This happened in 2016. When we fast forward to 2021, when we were fundraising for Afropolitan, I was able to call her, literally, and she invested again.
In this episode, Eche and I sit down to share our journey to convincing some of the world's top investors to back the first ever digital nation for Africans.
Anyone leaves with anything from this episode, it's when you're fundraising, the first people you should recruit for is the
So this is a very special episode of the Afropolitan podcast. We are going to talk about how to fundraise and how to pitch, because we get this question all the time.
Yeah. How did we raise $2.4 million? What did the investors see? Why did they back us? And so we wanted to do this episode to just provide a framework of how to raise funds for your startup. And yeah, let's dive into it.
Okay.
When you walked into your first investor pitch, what did you realize the investors cared about the most?
Okay. So I got to go back because people feel like this was my first time fundraising. It's not. I had to fundraise when I was CEO of TalentBase. This was 2015, 2016. So this was literally 10 years ago, right? And I got into 500 startups. But even before I got into 500 startups, I did a lot of pitch competitions. And what I quickly realized is that investors care about the numbers, right? And it's not about like saying, oh, I have this fancy hockey stick graph and showing, oh, I have all this traction, all those things. It's really, investors want to know, do you know the numbers? Do you know them inside out? Do you understand your industry? And I even think, are you delusional about it, right? And is there, as you like to say, audacity? I really think they care about those elements. And so I know for me, when I was just trying to understand how I can position myself so people are interested in giving me a check, especially at that time, Black women, there was like 10 of us. I could count on my hand how many of us have raised over $1 million. A lot of it was just like me able to really understand my numbers and really be able to go through the charts and show them those details.
You've been in the game a long time. What was the startups you were working on in that time, or at that time when you were fundraising at 500 startups?
You know, it's so interesting. So I'm trying to remember, because I remember having a lunch conversation with E. I think he was working on Flutterwave. I remember talking to Ezra. So this was Paystack. I think Paystack got into YC
2016.
2016. So yeah, because I got into 500. I want to say 2016, like fall 2016. So I believe Paystack was already at YC and they were kind of at the tail end. I remember Akin was working on his startup as well, which was loans, Aya Credit. So this was like early days. Not all of us made it. I'll just say that. Not all of us made it.
What did TalentBase do?
So TalentBase was an HR startup. And it's interesting because I was not the founder. And I want to put the record straight because there was all this drama attention of whether I was a founder or not. I was not. It was started by OZ. And when I came in, I became CEO eventually. And it was really trying to solve the payroll issue, right? At the time, the banks were not talking to each other. So it was super manual in order to remit payroll funds to employees. But even more, you have to pay in Nigeria pensions. There's all these different fees you have to pay. And so that was the problem that we were trying to solve.
Okay. Awesome.
So I want you now to talk about, because I think you have a very interesting background. And it's so funny because when people talk about community, they act like it's something new when we've been doing this. So I want you to talk about how you're able to translate community into actual investment when you were talking to investors.
Yeah, I think there's so many ways in which our stories intersect, right? I had started doing Afrobeats events in the West Coast, California to be exact. I think I was one of the first people to usher in the Afrobeats movement into California. Nigerian Independence Day parties. I mean, you're talking about from 2009, 2010. So we were doing two-face concerts, P-Square concerts, that whole thing, right? And throughout that whole period, I never thought about it as community. We used to think about it as partying, right? And it wasn't until I met Ian in 2016 for the first time where he came to the Nigerian Independence Day party and he says, wow, like these many people are here. This is community building. This is like a skill set. And I'd never seen it in that way until he described it in that way, where it's like you are a community builder at scale. And so when it then came time to raise for Afropolitan and for the Digital Nation perspective, I remember when investors were doing due diligence and they would go all the way back to all the events I'd ever done to look at it, to ask people who had been to those events. And the reason why that's important for founders listening is investors will always do due diligence on you. Part of that is to see your track record. What have you stayed with in your life that they can see that you stayed with for 10 years? Why? Because most startups are minimum 5-year journey, maximum 10, 15, 20-year journey, right? So they want to know that you as the founder have the ability to stay for the long term. So for them, when they were then doing due diligence on Eche, they had to go back and say, hey, what has Eche stuck with when there were no lights, when it was dark, when nobody cared? And what did he stick with for 10 years? We can evaluate to tell us this is somebody who's going to be here in the trenches when it's bad and also be there when it's good. So that's something that's also important.
And I think something also important is to talk about the pivot you made, because a lot of times on the startup journey, yes, there's people who are technical founders, right? But most of us are not. So I want you to talk about the moment that influenced you pivoting from parties, event promoter, to literally understanding the value of tech.
I think I was a tech enthusiast, right? So I did law school, finished up law school in San Francisco. But even while at law school, I would always be looking at the Silicon Valley guys. At the time, that was when the Sholas of Paystack were coming, the Ian of Flutterwave, GB, and they would all come to San Francisco at the time for YC, or Y Combinator, which is an accelerator for folks who don't know. And we would all interact, right? Whether it was Yele or a bunch of all those guys who raised for YC at the time, even you as well, right? We would all be sitting around talking in different settings, and I would just be listening, right? I think I spent from 2016 till 2022 when we raised, just listening, right? Getting information, being educated on the ecosystem, how it goes, how to fundraise, how to approach different situations. And I think at the time, I kept on saying to myself, like, I feel like I want to transition to tech, but I'd gone to law school. So where does that transition come from? Thankfully, Ian at the time offered me to come to Flutterwave right after law school. And that was how I was able to transition from law to tech, right? And fintech company, Flutterwave. But even while there, I learned about the fintech industry, did my deep research, but it wasn't until I read Naval's book, The Almanac of Naval Ravikant, that I feel like I got an education on the mindset and the frameworks of how to even navigate the tech world and why it was important, right? I think Naval says something like there are 4 ways to build wealth, right? Labor, capital, media, and code. I remember reading that, and there was a light bulb moment that went up in my eyes. I'm like, look, I've been hustling backwards, because up until that point, I had been doing labor. What did that mean? I've been doing events, throwing the biggest parties, concerts, festivals, but that is labor intensive. And the question then was, how do you transition from permission leverage, which is labor and capital? Because with labor, you need somebody to give you their permission. So anyone who's working for you gives you their permission for you to work for them. For capitals, people who have money like investors give you permission to use their money to go build something. But permissionless leverage, media and code, is you're an engineer, you're able to code something, and you can make money while you sleep. You're somebody in media, like a podcast, writing a book, newsletters. People can digest your product while you sleep, and you're able to make money. So that framework, that mental model opened up to me why I should transition to tech and allowed us to do that pivot. But I would say having a network and a friendship group of people who were already in the industry allowed me to have a soft landing. It was almost like I went to school for free for like 6 years, right? Because they would all come and I would be the person, because I wasn't in their industry, that they would run ideas by, right? Like I would be in the room, they would run ideas by me because obviously they considered me sharp, but I wasn't necessarily in their industry. So they could run ideas through me without necessarily being or thinking that Eche is in the industry. So maybe Eche might have other thoughts on something. So I got to have a free education that way.
We created the Afropolitan podcast because we wanted to make sure we tell the stories of those who came before us and those who are coming in front of us.
Our stories deserve to be documented and remembered.
And over here at Afropolitan, our drink of choice is Invaroche, which is a gin from South Africa, because we believe African brands are global. So Eche, what are you toasting to?
So our builders, our innovators, to show that Black brilliance exists worldwide.
I am toasting to African creativity. I feel like the world is just blossoming with beautiful African storytellers.
Here's to legacy.
And stories worth sharing. And you know, it's so funny you say this, because a lot of people see us raise the capital and they don't realize that we have been in tech for a long time. And I think something else that is really important is relationships, right? When I think about the first $1 million we raised, all of them were relationships that we built over 10 years, right? And I always tell people it was a lot of failed startups along the way, right?
A lot of failure.
Yeah, a lot of failures that didn't work, a lot of networking, a lot of connecting. I think about how, you know, I got into 500 startups, and it's interesting, that thread, because I got into 500 startups because another fellow Nigerian, and his name is Benga, so shout out to him. And I feel like, I'm trying to remember how we actually connected. Like either it was Facebook or LinkedIn, and we would have like little G chats, and he would, you know, update me. And then randomly he was like, you know, I know you said you need funding for TalentBase. Have you ever considered applying for YC or 500 startups? Because those were like the two big ones at the time. And I was like, I don't even know like where to start. And so he coached me, literally, right? And he coached me through how to like pitch and how to present myself. And then I'll never forget, I had a phone call with Elizabeth. And
Elizabeth Yin.
Yeah, Elizabeth Yin, Hustle Fund. And we did the pitch, and she said, look, I'm taking a big chance on you, right? Because we typically do not invest in Nigerian startups, but I love who you are. I love your vision. We're going to invest. And I was so excited. And the reason why I'm bringing up that story is because this happened in 2016, right? And so when we fast forward to 2021,
6 years later,
yes, when we were fundraising for Afropolitan, I was able to call her literally, and she invested again, right? And so I think it's really important, you know, that people keep relationships. I think quite often people think that like you just wake up one day and you raise capital. A lot of times there's a lot of coffees. Like I had countless coffees, lunches, going to conferences, like literally stalking these people and warming up the relationship, so that by the time we actually fundraised for Afropolitan, these were relationships. People knew who I was. They've seen what I built. And even though some of the startups did not work out, they knew that I had an understanding and knowledge of how to build a company.
I think that's the thing I really want a lot of founders to understand. Failure is part of this game, right?
Yep.
Like 99 or 98% of startups fail.
Yes.
Your investors know this. Your partners know this. Anyone who's actually in the game knows that failure is part of the game. I think what tends to happen, especially in the African setting, is how we are raised. We're not necessarily raised to embrace failure.
Yeah.
Like whether it's from academics, like people, you're either first in class or you're nothing, right? And in startup world or in the entrepreneurship world, failure is part of the game. That's why you see first, second, third, fourth time founders still keep getting funded. The only thing though that is taboo in this space is fraud, misrepresentation, being able to maybe lie your way to investors. These are reputational risks, right? You can always come back to investors and raise again if they believe that you're somebody who showed up with high integrity and handled your business in a way that was appropriate, right? So I think it's something, going back to what you said. Even I remember that Naval quote where he says, you have to be able to play long-term games with long-term people. So the investor you met in 2016 is still the same investor. I remember actually pitching her. She was the first investor I'd ever pitched. I told you this at the time. Like, she was the first one, and I remember her being very gracious because I could tell, like, the Eche who pitched her then to the Eche who can pitch now, two completely different people. So she was able to still back us, even given the vision, but a lot of it was also down to you too and the relationship you had with her.
Yeah, and I think another, interesting thing that I want more Africans to have when they're fundraising is you need to have audacity like Oyubo Man, okay? Because what's his name from WeWork failed miserably
20 billion
with WeWork, and then still was able to, he went in hiding, came back and raised capital again. So I also think it's a lot about audacity, how you enter the room, and as well as your aura. But speaking of that, I want you to also talk about storytelling, right? Because I talked about how I believe numbers are super important, knowing your numbers and really understanding your industry. But I also do think a lot of fundraising and pitching is tied to the story, right? So can you talk about that? Because I think with Afropolitan, there was also a story.
Yeah. And it's funny because when we first started pitching, like when I pitched Elizabeth, that pitch did not necessarily include that much storytelling. But by the time we had come by like the next 10 investors, I think, again, you're practicing, right? And you're getting your pitch right. And I can just maybe walk through the pitch we gave so people can then have an understanding. And I think it was about like maybe a 2 or 3 minute pitch. But how I started off was, hey, the best way to understand Afropolitan is to think through the Afropolitan journey, right? Think about it in 3 phases. Phase 1 of Afropolitan is an organization we started while in law school, catering to the African diaspora through events, parties, concerts, festivals. A significant highlight of what we achieved in phase 1 was something called the Year of Return that happened in Ghana. Along with our partners, we were able to draw about 1 million plus people to Ghana for the Year of Return. It generated about $2 billion worth of economic activity in Ghana. That was phase 1. Phase 2 starts in 2020 when we were looking to redo the Year of Return, but COVID happened. So COVID decimated the entire in real life events industry. We were able to pivot, but we pivoted into media, but through a social audio app called Clubhouse. On Clubhouse, between I and Chika, we were able to, build an online community of about 200,000 people collectively, right? And that was phase 2. Phase 3 then starts in April 2021, where we came across the article by Balaji Srinivasan, a former CTO of Coinbase, where he argues for the creation of a network state. And in network state, he argues for the first ever online internet country. The reason why that spoke to us was when we read it, there was a particular quote in there where he says, because the brand new is unthinkable, we fight over the old. And I remember reading that and saying to myself, like, what is the brand new that's unthinkable for us as Africans? Like good roads, healthcare, good governance, whereas like our counterparts in maybe like a Singapore or China are thinking about going to the moon or going to space or going to Mars. And that's the unthinkable to them. But for us, we're still stuck in an environment where just basic amenities are a problem to us. And so we said, we're going to set out to go build the first ever, internet country. But how did we even get there? And then this is where I didn't tie in the example of the revelation that happened in Kenya. So I would say in December 23rd, 2021, we're in Nairobi, Kenya. I woke up at 5 a.m., right? I remember reaching out to you later and saying like, hey, I think we need to build a new country. And I remember at the time feeling like, if Chika says this is the dumbest idea I've ever had, we're going to have to pack this up, but basically you told them that story. And a lot of times, a lot of them were hooked on the story, but then you then had to walk through to tell them how you were going to go to achieve this. So this is where I would transition in the pitch and say, our goal is to then unlock this in 4 phases. Phase 1 is to build a private network of the best African diaspora have to offer, right? And seed that network with our first initial passports, right? Which we went ahead and released. Phase 2 is then building a society as a service. So like a super app of sorts that could power all the services within this digital nation, right? And we compared that to WeChat at the time, right? So that's phase 2. Phase 3 was what we were calling the minimum viable state. How do you build an MVP version of this sort of digital country that is able to do services like maybe Visa on Arrival, which we do today, and a bunch of other sorts of services. So think about that as like Red Cross or the WHO or even the UN. These are like minimum viable state type actors, right? And phase 4 was the land piece. So yes, internet country, but you have to interact with the land. We then said, hey, we want to innovate on that. We want to combine an embassy, which is a sovereign territory and a host government, and a Chinatown. So if you do an embassy plus a Chinatown, it would equal a sovereign Afrotown in major cities across the world. And so when we pitched it like that to investors, yes, don't get me wrong, this is the wildest, till today, it's probably some of the most wildest like pitching we've had, but we had audacity, we had ambition, we had vision, and we also were the best team to go out there and execute on this. One of the hardest things to undertake, but it was the best thing. The other thing though, because I remember when we were raising for this, when we were pitching the African investor side of it, they kept on saying to us like, just raise $1 million. Like, meanwhile, our American people were saying, raise 5 million out the gate. And I remember, obviously, we decided to go with what the Nigerian investors said, which ended up in some ways limiting us. But I remember at the time when we went to America after closing the first $1 million in Nigeria, when we went to America, the American investors were like, so you're trying to build a whole country and it's $1 million you think you're going to use it to do? Like, what are you doing here? And I remember what I took from that was sometimes in Africa when we're raising, I've been in Rwanda where somebody will come and tell you like, this thing I'm building is going to change the world. And like, okay, cool. How much are you raising? They'll say $50,000, bro. How? And it's almost like we have this perception that where the savings account for an investor, like just give me small money and I promise you I'll bring you back the world. That's not how reality works. The investors know that it's going to take much more, sometimes capital intensive checks to help you over the hump. But sometimes we come in just asking for the bare minimum because we don't believe that we can get a bigger check. And it ends up screwing you over in the long term. So when you're going out to raise, one of the things you should do from a founder perspective is self-awareness, right? Do you believe in what you're doing? Do you believe in it as much as to say, this requires this level of capital? And can you walk into investor pitches and then demand that sort of check size because you know what you're building demands? And it doesn't mean you should collect all the whole money in the world, because that's also another part that founders run into. Sometimes you over raise, right? So there's a lesson in there when you're raising your first initial check, make sure your valuation is still small enough because your next raise is also important. There needs to be a balance. There needs to be a balance. So the way I always tell founders today is think about your raises in 5 stages. There's a seed stage, Series A, Series B, Series C, Series D, and possibly IPO. Yep. Or you get acquired. But that in each of that, don't give up more than 20% for each stage, right? And I think I see so many African founders make this mistake, and it's something, and even American founders too. So it's not just limited to African founders, but founders around the world make this particular mistake. So it's something that I would say that folks should take note of. Yeah. And I think another thing that is also important that you were talking about is why did they back us, right? As the team, because another important thing that I always think about when I'm talking to investors, and even because we're angel investors, right? And we always think about, okay, who are these people, right? So number one, you talked about reputation, but I also think people want to know, like, do you have the credibility? Have you built something like this before? Are you known for this particular skill set, right? So if you're telling me you're building a digital nation, can you get people to believe in this nation that you're trying to build? Are you able to build a foundation? And I know for us, right, I think number one, I have been in the tech circle for a very long time. A lot of these OG founders that you see have raised, and I mean, there's lots of ways of how Nigerian founders have raised capital, but I've been there from the beginning, essentially. So I think that really helps with credibility. People have seen me pitch, people have seen me build a company, people have seen me won specific contracts and actually work with banks to integrate with banks. And I really think that was helpful as far as, okay, this is someone who actually has raised capital, executed, worked with the engineering team and can move through. And I think on your side, it's about community, right? And I feel like you have a very clear track record of someone who's able to curate, right? Because you have to be a curator in order to build what we're doing, being able to build community at scale, right? And it's not just like a word that you use and say like, oh, I know about community. It's like you actually showed it. So even the point
I think this is so funny. When we went to, what's that European country we went to?
This is Montenegro.
Yeah, Montenegro, right? And, with Montenegro, essentially Vitalik, who is one of the, or the founder of Ethereum, he invited a bunch of people in different facets, right? So people who were building network states, people who were interested in longevity, AI. And it's so interesting. What year was that?
2023.
And this was before ChatGPT. Anyways,
no, ChatGPT had come out.
Well, it came out.
Still early stages.
Yeah, it was still very basically, but it was like if you knew, you knew.
Yeah.
It wasn't like out there really properly. And I remember we were the only people building a network state that actually brought our community.
Yeah.
Right. Like everyone kept saying, it's so funny. Everyone else keeps talking about network states and they're building this network thing. Where are your people? And we actually literally had throughout I think we were there for what, like 6 weeks or so. We literally had different people who had Afropolitan passports physically be there in Montenegro with us, right? Yeah. And so we were able to quickly show to different people proof of concept to the point where, didn't we get another investment from Montenegro, right? So I think it's really just important as well, like, okay, build the relationships, but also be able to back up what you're saying, be able to show proof of these are things that I've done before, even if it's not at scale, but be able to show something. I think that's also really important.
Because I think when I think back to some of the criticism we've gotten with Afropolitan, there's always this sense of me and you just showed up and we asked people for money and they just deposited money. And it's like, I wish we had that kind of sweet mouth, but that's not how it works in reality, right? I think when you go back and look at the evidence, right, you're seeing from Eche's perspective, somebody who started doing events since 2009, the two faces of the world can testify, the Peace Corps of the world can testify, but they're also hard verifiable tickets that were sold, right? And when you look at from 2009 to like 2022 when we raised, you're talking about like 12 plus years. And I started at like, 18? Right. So when you're not going to look back at that track record, you're saying, no, this is somebody who was there when, cancellations from Wizkid, cancellations from Burna Boy, went bankrupt multiple times. Like I've seen shit get in this business. Just don't think that because them are sitting here, my beard is connecting. I've been in trenches, yeah. And so there was just this whole sense of like, no, these people just arrived, but 300,000 tickets sold throughout that time. That's verifiable evidence, right? So aside from that, then it was like, okay, you want to build a digital nation. What have you actually done online? Because it's digital nation, right? You didn't say physical country, digital nation. Yes, you're showing us proof that you're able to bring people together. No problem. What have you shown online? Between you and I, 200,000 people online on Clubhouse. That was verifiable evidence. The numbers are still there, right? And people can obviously remember during the whole Clubhouse period, pandemic, we were organizing rooms, we were organizing shows. And so that was another piece of evidence to then show, okay, these guys actually have the capacity to go build a network state. It's not people who say, okay, we want to build a country, but you've never done a party before, or you've never even done a dinner party. You can't even do house party. Nobody knows your house, so show verifiable evidence that, you've actually done what it is that you're claiming to about to go do. And then people can back the larger vision of what you want to go achieve. I would say, how did it feel for you when, I pitched you the Afropolitan Nation? Like, what was it that you felt like we could sell to investors with that?
It's interesting. I will never forget that night because we were in Nairobi and I saw you pacing around the room and you were like in a deep trance. Like, I was like, what is going on? It is early in the morning, 5 a.m. And, it's so interesting because I always tell you, most of the time when people pitch things to me, I'm like, that don't make no sense. Or it gotta connect.
I see it all the time.
It's not working out for me. I don't know. Maybe I was in a state of delusion that morning. I don't really know, but I think, immediately, so a lot of people don't realize about me. So my first degree was in psychology and I am a heavy researcher, right? Because in both of my degrees, we had to do a lot of research, a lot of papers written, and you always have to have sources. Whenever you write a capstone paper, you have to be able to back it up with hundreds of sources. So I remember you said, I think we need to build a new country. And I remember at some point, this was before ChatGPT. Now
it's incredible.
It would have been a different thing. But so I had to go to Google Chrome and type it in. And so I remember I was searching And interestingly enough, for some reason, my brain, because my brain is like really, if you look inside my brain, it's really crazy. It went into the Federalist Papers, right? Which are the beginning papers of forming United States. Yeah. And I just remember reading those documents and I was like, wow, there's a lot of threads here. There's a lot of parallels here, right? And even the language they used around why they decided that they needed to start America and the people and how they thought through the different details. And so I said, they did it. Why can't we do it? Right now, of course, it's a little more difficult, right? And practice. But I definitely feel that I believed in you. And I think also because I've actually seen you put people together. I have actually seen you build a community, right? I've literally been at your events when I was fundraising back in 2017 for TalentBase. I've seen the power. So I felt like there was credibility, right? Not just because you're my partner, because you know me, I'm quick to say no. Yeah. I'm strict over here. No. But I think I just believed in what you were saying.
But it's also important, I think, for us to clarify why, right? Okay. Like it's not just, hey, we just had this idea. It was fundable. It was ambitious. I think when you saw me pacing, I was pacing because in my head, I was like, look, I am actually frustrated about what it looks like to be a Black man in this world. And I am done, right? And that we need to build something. And I remember just in my head, because I went to sleep, but my eyes were closed, but I wasn't sleeping. It was like one of those, that meme where you see the calculations going. And I was like, yo, we need to come up with a solution that if we can execute on it, it can mean freedom for all our people, not just some people. And I remember just saying to myself, like, but it needs to be a big enough boat. Okay, so then I said, is it a company? No, because a company can get shut down. Is it an app? No, because an app can get shut down. What is it? Is it like an institution? I'm like, not necessarily. Like it needs to be a big enough boat that it's harder to shut down. And I was like, what is it? It's like, it's a country. A country is one of those things that is not as hard to shut down because most countries have sovereignty and then obviously you have to worry about your military, all of that. But most of the time when you have a powerful country with a powerful passport, you're able to navigate the world with your passport. And the reasons why, right? I think for me, it was, I no longer believed that the current nation state process was working out for us as Africans globally, or even as Black people around the world. Like we have just been in a situation where we've been treated like dirt throughout our entire existence for the most part. And that quote by Balaji where he says, because the brand new is unthinkable, we fight over the old, was something that was hooking me because I'm like, are we saying that the best of our best? And I think what really drove me insane about this was I came up in Silicon Valley in the Bay. That is such a unique experience because it's one of those areas in the world where you can argue some of the best talented Black people live in, but they're working for companies doing big things, right? But they're not necessarily building like the biggest things for our own people. Yeah. And I said to myself, like, but if they can build Microsoft and they can build OpenAI, why can't we use these same people to build something for us that allows us to transcend some of the issues that we're having? And that was the framework, right? And I think we'll go into it much more deeper, but that was one of the motivations behind why a digital nation and why go out for this. And to be honest, at that time, I didn't even know that this was fundraisable. So that's another thing too. I remember at the time when I had the idea, and this is people like you, I blame people like Yele, people like Aim, because when you go run this idea, which is what I did, I had this idea, I've run it by Chika. Chika says, no, let's go do it. I'm like, maybe she just supports me because she likes me. No problem. I go to like the Yeles of the world, the Ains of the world to run this idea by them. And they're like, nah, go forth with it. And I was like, you know what? Let me go to the original person who wrote this article, which was Balaji. And I messaged Balaji on DM'd him on Twitter. And he was like, no, bro, I love it. In fact, let me know when you're raising. I would like to put a check in. I'm like, raising? Like, I didn't even know that this was a fundraising idea. I just thought this was a bootstrapping thing. Like, it's a movement. You don't necessarily have to raise. And he was then the one who really put that idea out there that, hey, we can actually go out and fundraise for this. Yeah.
And so speaking of idea, right, I think another interesting thing, and I think we may have different opinions here, is I want to talk about what's the difference between having an idea and having traction. Because I'm going to be very honest, right? When we were fundraising in 2021, I think ideas, 2022. Or 2022, I think ideas could fly, right? That was the
ZERP era, zero interest payments
yeah,
era.
it was a very
It was vibes.
yeah,
then.
it was vibes. Let's be honest, it was vibes. I think right now we're in the era of traction, right? Where you have to be able to show some proof of traction, early signs. So can you talk about the difference between investors when you're pitching an idea versus attraction?
Yeah, I think traction always matters.
Yeah.
Always mattered. But I think at that time, there was so much like quote unquote money. The valuations were high. This was like crypto period, crypto season. Everything was going to the moon, you know. But I think traction has always mattered. I think what happens is sometimes you have the idea, but then you have not shown any proof of concept. Like, how do we know that? Show us something small. The best example I can give for that is when Elon goes out to promote any of his products, right? He'll first come and show you a prototype. He won't show you 100,000 cars. He'll show you a prototype. That prototype is what we call evidence to this is what's coming in the future. After he's shown you the prototype, you're then investing in the person who could have done this small traction here, even if it's one customer, 100 customers, 1,000 customers, can potentially scale this to 1 billion or 100 million or 500 million, right? And so traction is always important, and your idea is also great, but ideas alone, like you can't imagine how many times I hear founders say, "Oh, so and so stole my idea." I'm like, bro.
And then, or they ask you to sign an NDA, and I'm like, what's
please,
that?
Guys, stop that. No experienced investor. In fact, that's a red flag when you have an idea and you're telling an investor or other people that you're consulting with, like, sign an NDA. Bro, your idea is not that precious. Everybody in this actual game knows that idea is one thing, execution is another, right? You will be judged by how well you execute.
MySpace and Facebook.
Exactly, MySpace and Facebook. So even with us, idea, traction, everything was there, but ultimately we will be judged on how well did we execute with this. So I would say that that's the distinction there. Like, traction will always be important, and no matter how small too. I think that's another thing. I think some founders think traction has to be like humongous, right? No, if you've only sold 3, or if you've only closed 3 customers, that is enough because 3 people have said that they believe in what you're selling. An investor can then extrapolate from that and say, hey, this is what it's going to be future-wise, right? What about you? What advice would you give to founders, especially from an idea perspective?
Yeah, so when I think about when you have just an idea, right? And maybe like, I want to really break this down for someone who doesn't have maybe any traction. Maybe they have not built up a network of investors, you know, because I know we're going to have different varieties of people that listen. So I think number one is if you just have an idea, the beautiful thing about in 2025, right, is that there is now AI tools that can help you spur that idea. So now you can send a voice note to ChatGPT and say, this is my idea. Now, of course, ChatGPT can sometimes be your cheerleader. So make sure you ask it, please make sure to really battle test this idea, go back and forth, weigh the pros and cons. And what I love about what we have today is we literally have a tool that at least will help you ground the conversation you're going to have with early engineers and investors, whether or not this idea makes any sense, and really help you map out from, okay, how do I execute? Or at least how can I start an MVP? So maybe it's literally sending a voice note to ChatGPT. How can I have this idea. How can I do an MVP? What are the different ways I can show early traction to investors, right? I think another thing that people don't really rely enough on is a lot of times people think VC. They don't realize that sometimes the first people that are going to write you a check is your family, your friends, you know, a friend of a friend. I think it's important to know other startup founders and ask them for introductions. I know that's what we did, right? It's like, oh, hey, I know, you know, so-and-so invested in you. Can you introduce me to that person, right? And when you have an idea, sit down with them, have a coffee chat. Right? I know some people that invested in us was because we had a coffee chat, we had dinner, you know, we saw them at a conference, we kind of warmed up what we're talking about, and maybe they weren't convinced, and that's fine because you're gonna get mostly no's. That's the truth, and that's the other thing about being a founder when you're fundraising. Be okay with the no. Yeah. Most people will tell you no. It is okay, right? I can go through all the great startups that were told no, and they've gone on to IPO. But I think also just having those dinners and then being able to follow up with them, right? I think that's the other thing as well. Like if you can sit down with an investor and say, hey, this was my idea, this is what I'm doing. And then you can come back 6 months later and literally show traction. Then investor's like, okay, this is someone that like has followed through, is executing, and then it actually warms them up to the idea. I think someone that we interviewed, Ike talked about that, right? Where there was someone who approached him and he was like, I don't really care about this idea. And it was someone who reintroduced him to him. And now the guy was able to show traction, and now he's interested in following up with this person, right? So I think it's really important, to do that, especially when you have ideas. Just have early conversations. I think actually talk to as many people as you can. Let them help you think through it. You never know how, I know the conversations you have with Yele, sometimes it sparks an idea, it sparks a conversation. So I think that's really important when you have ideas.
I think for me too, it's almost like dating.
Yeah,
right?
it is. It is dating.
And I remember even before we started fundraising, just the idea alone was something we workshopped along so many people. I remember we were in Ghana. We went to Jesse's place and we were literally on a whiteboard workshopping it, right? And we must have talked to 100 people just for the idea.
Yeah.
Not fundraising, just the idea like, hey, this is an idea that I have. What are your thoughts on it? What do you think about it? And then they would keep giving you feedback. And as they gave you feedback, you would then craft the idea because their questions helped sharpen the idea, which is, what's so crazy? Because now in the day of ChatGPT, all those 100 questions, Chat could have done it for us easily, right? So it's almost to see like, we were doing this thing the hard way, right?
Really
because
the hard way.
100 people coming back at you with the hardest questions, and you had to like figure out a way to give them an answer that was satisfiable, or maybe it depends, but they wanted to trust. And I think that's another thing founders need to understand. The investor on the other side wants to know your thought process. How do you think about things? Do you come to something that's obvious and then you're like, oh, let's just ignore that? Or do you come and you say, you know what? I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out, right? Like there's a confidence in, don't project I know it all, because you won't ever. You're going to pivot many times in a startup. They just want to know that your thought process says to them, you will come across a problem, you will think through it from most likely first principles, and you will reach a conclusion that any reasonable or objective person can reach to when thinking through something properly, right? And I think that's the other thing advice I would give to founders too.
So let's talk about the actual pitch deck, right? And it's interesting because I do think there has been a slight change in how investors want to be pitched, right? I know we actually wrote like an actual like investment. Yeah. So I think depending on your startup, sometimes an investment memo will suffice, or at least start the conversation. Sometimes you need a pitch deck. And I think one thing that's important to lay out is like what actually is needed in the pitch deck. And again, with the advent of AI, it could create the deck for you, right? When we were fundraising, we had to literally create the deck manually and put all the images and the graphics and things like that. But I think, number one, it's important obviously to talk about the team, right? I think it's important to talk about the market, the industry. And I also think it's really important to talk about what else is out there, because a lot of times when people are pitching and they're just like, oh yeah, this is original, no one else has done this before. No. Most ideas have been executed or done before, or at least attempted. So if you're able to at least clearly share what is happening in the market, what's happening right now. And I think it even looks better on your deck when you're able to show the differences between like, what's that? It's like kind of like this, competitor like analysis, and you're able to show like where you fall in all that. I think it's really important to do that. And of course, like the why. Right. I think it's really important. Like when you have, let's say you have 7, or 5 pages on your deck, that you open up with like the why, the storytelling, who you are, and then you're able to go into the market. And I think the other thing, and I'm going to say this is specific. This is very specific when it comes to Nigerian founders, is when they're doing the total addressable market and they do 200 million people. And it's like, no. Not all 200 million people are going to buy your thing. Not 200 million people might even have the income to buy the product or whatever you're doing. So I think it also really looks good on your pitch deck when you're able to really talk about, yes, if I'm doing Nigeria, there's 200 million people in the market, but this is actually the market of people that can buy or will use or consume my services. So I think those things are important. I mean, what else would you say is important on a pitch deck?
I remember I watched a YC video with Sam Altman. I think he did this like 13 years ago. I think it was called YC Startup School. And the frameworks he put in there, I wish it was something I'd seen even before we had raised, I think he said, and he wasn't necessarily talking about slides, but just how to think through even your pitch deck. So idea, product, team, execution, and luck is what he said that you need to be able to have a successful startup. The reason why I say that is when you're now going to pitch, obviously you have to have the opportunity, right, in your pitch deck. You have to say, what's the problem? What's the solution? And why you, like you said, what is the unique insight that you have that nobody else has, and why now, right? And then the most important part too is the team. Again, you should think about a startup and the race you're in as an Olympics game. You're coming here for gold. There's no second runner-up, third runner-up. There's no bronze. There's no silver. It's gold all the way. So if you're a person who's like, oh yeah, my team is me, and then, you know, like 5 other people who have not shown anything that they're able to build or don't have any track record, why should I back you over this person who, because people tend to make this mistake about, oh, it's about where this person went to school or who their friends are. No, it's where they've gone to school and the people they have access to. And then also the work that they have done shows me that I should probably back them over you that might just only have the idea but no team, right? So I would say if anyone leaves with anything from this episode, it's when you're fundraising, the first people you should recruit for is the team. Convince the team first, and that team will also help you with your fundraise. Why? Because the investors will say to themselves, if you were able to convince these people to join you on this startup journey, then you might be somebody who is worth backing. I'll give you an example, like with OpenAI, Sam, when he first started OpenAI, he's obviously recruiting people. It's Elon, it's like Ilya, it's like the top of the top, the best of the best in their fields. When those people go raise, fam, is $1 billion check, is $2 billion checks, because they're like, this is the best teams, like the Avengers type team that could be assembled if you wanted to go do this, right? So your team is important. Sometimes you can raise pre-product or post-product, but that would be your MVP. Again, make sure that your MVP actually works. You don't need to over-deliver on it, but it helps build your credibility. Like you said, traction. You need to be able to put traction on the pitch deck. And then your ask, right? This is obviously we're thankful YC came up with this whole concept of a SAFE, right? Which is a simple agreement for future equity. Most times in the VC venture capitalist world, most people raise with SAFEs. Now, if you're in like private equity or in other sorts of funding arrangements, I think this episode is most likely geared towards more venture capitalist fundraising. We actually have an episode, I'm sure by the time this airs, we would have it. It's with Okay and Alama of ACA, African Capital Alliance. He can give a better breakdown on how to raise some private equity. But from a venture capitalist perspective, you need that traction. You need to be able to show sometimes an MVP. You need to also have the opportunity. Why now? And what's also the unique insight that you have to bring to this particular problem set?
And also, one other thing I want to add when it comes to the pitch deck, specifically the team, because I cannot overemphasize how important a team is. Most startups fail because of a team.
Yeah.
Right? There's either in-house fighting, there's founder drama, there's no alignment, because also that founding team, people don't understand, is literally a marriage, right? And so, we literally have to, to fight, right? And make sure that we're aligned at all times while running this company. But also when you are trying to build the early days of your team, making sure you look for the gaps, right? So it's like, okay, I have a lot of operational experience. I'm not a technical person. So find a technical person. If you are a technical founder, and I think this is key because I see this a lot with people who pitch, they're very technical. They don't know anything about business. They don't know anything about business development. They're not a salesperson. They don't know how to make any sales. And I've seen that time and time and time again. So making sure that when you have the team, when you're creating your pitch deck, it's a really good time to say, you know what, there's a gap. How can I fill that gap? Because also, I remember there was an investor that literally did not invest in someone because there was a gap on the team. Yeah. Right. And I've seen that quite often. All the time. So I think that's really, really important. But I want to also move to what didn't work, right? In the beginning when we were fundraising, right? Because I know for us, if I am not mistaken, I remember we went like directly to VCs and we're like, ooh, okay, maybe we have to go to angels first and show a little bit of traction. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, so I think, again, everything is team construct, right? So I would say when you're fundraising, it's almost like I think for me, how I made it make sense for me was it's almost like Eche, this is you promoting the party. Usually you would go into a venue, maybe the capacity is 1,000 people. I would literally have to be able to say to myself that come this particular day, there'll be 1,000 plus people here and it's filled. And that's literally the work I did for years, right? So I remember when it came time for me to understand fundraising, it's like, no, you need to promote it like you would promote an event, meaning you drive FOMO, you drive fear of missing out, you pitch, you're clear about what it is that you're trying to go do, but you also leverage the fact of who's going to be there, because that's even the same things that happen with party promo, right? Sometimes you might say, hey, Chris Brown is going to be there, or Wizkid is going to be there, or Wizkid is doing a concert. People will come because of that. So I remember one of the first things we did when we started raising was we had closed angel checks from like, obviously, people within our network, the Sholas, the Ains, the GBs, people in the industry, right? And I think that would give it credibility when you were raising from other people, and they would say, okay, who else is in? And you'd mention all these names, and they would, most of the time, they would be like, oh, wow, if you were able to convince all these people to be on your cap table, what do they know that I don't know, right? And then if they went to then do their own research, they were like, okay, cool, I'm going to invest. Or if they went to do DD, because some of them I'm sure would have reached out to the people who invested in us, and they would have gotten either good feedback or confirmation that, yes, I did invest in them, right? And so that's another thing, like make sure that you have your champions of people who actually cut checks into your company. The other thing I would say is interview the people you want to go on this journey with, because this journey, man, listen, I remember when we finished raising and I'm in Oakland, and I go to this place in the Atlas. It's like a rooftop in Oakland. And there were a bunch of other black founders, male black founders there. And then they were congratulating me on raising. And then after they congratulated me, they said, okay, now that this is done, let's not give you the real. This is going to be like the worst next years of your life. And so if you think that this is something to be happy about, you're actually about to begin a journey of proper suffering, right? And looking back now, I understand completely what they mean. And what I'm saying by that is, on this journey, it will get so lonely. You need to choose investors who are going to be partners with you throughout. Most people don't ever say this to you. Maybe 80% of the investors that you get might never talk to you again until after you get another thing that maybe allows them to get their money back. And it's not personal. It's just that they have things going on. But prior to that, all of them will promise you the world. They will say, yes, if you need me for this, please just get me on your cap table. Please just do this. Please, like, because now they want to get into something that they consider hot. Like, there's a point when you're fundraising where sometimes you might be oversubscribed, which is where we were at. And everybody wants to just get in on what's the hottest thing that's going on. At that moment, I would say use discernment, date people, interview them, really get an understanding of who these people are and what they themselves have done. The same way they're doing due diligence on you, do due diligence on them too. They also have past portfolio companies they've invested in. Reach out to those founders of those companies and ask them, hey, would you recommend this person as a VC or as an investor? It's very, very important to do your due diligence, because you don't want to know the amount of nightmare scenarios we've heard and stories we've heard from nightmare investors. So it's very important that you do that as well. I would also say, don't take anything personal. Like you said, you're going to have a lot of no's, right? And it doesn't mean that they don't believe in you or that your idea is crap. Sometimes it's not also within their fund construct. I remember there were a bunch of checks that, we couldn't get because they're like, look, our average check size is 1 million. Like, even when we're talking to like a sovereign wealth fund who are like, hey, we want to invest, but we're going to give you a small check of 500K. I hear like a small check of 500K. That check in Nigeria is a whole round. What do you mean? But these are the differences, right? And then also the other thing that I'm going to warn founders is, just because you get a commitment only counts the money that's wired into your bank account. No commitments are finalized until the money has hit your bank account. And the reason why is, a lot of people don't know this, but we actually raised 3.5 million, right? But at the end of the day, what came in before we got some other investors was 2.1, right? And I remember the particular day, because this was around that time when the bear market first hit.
It was the FTX.
Yeah, around the FTX period, but even before that, prior. And it was a particular day, maybe back to back, where we got the calls like, hey, we're not going to be able to send these checks, right? And 1.5 million just went out like that. I remember that day I just said, see, yeah, I went and slept. I was like, let me just sleep first and get this feeling out. But then when you wake up, you say to yourself, like, you're not entitled to anyone's money. In fact, it's a blessing and an honor for anyone, no matter how small the check is, even if it's $1 that somebody gave you, it's a blessing for anybody to be able to back you with their money, with their time, with their gifts, right? And so I remember just waking up and just being grateful and saying, I will approach this from a sense of gratitude. And even if it was $1 somebody gave me, we'll go out there and make it work. And so that's something else that happens. Don't expect that every investor who commits to investing you will actually end up writing the check. And sometimes it's not because they didn't plan on doing it, but life also happens. Even as angel investors, sometimes it's like, yo, I've agreed to invest or something might have happened. Life will just happen. You just chop $1 billion that you did not even see coming from anywhere. And I think for a lot of those investors, to be fair to them, the bear market hit. LPs might not have been responding to their calls like, hey, wire this check. So many things happen. But I do also think how they manage it is important. I think one of the ones who we dealt with was actually quite poor. But these are the reasons why it's very important for me as a founder. Do your own due diligence on the investors you're raising from. Reach out to other founders that they've backed and get an overall holistic perspective on the type of person you're going on this journey with.
Yeah, and I also think another thing that's important when you're fundraising is you want to create momentum, like a snowball effect, and you want to have a limited window, right? I think it doesn't always look good if you've been fundraising for like
2 years.
Year, like, oh yeah, I'm still fundraising, I'm still trying to get a check, because then it's like, where is the momentum? And I know investors, it's very interesting, this thing of you saying like, when you're able to come back to VC, because I remember we got the angel checks, and when we're able to go to VC and say, look, we already have $1 million. So what you gonna do? Like, are you gonna invest? You're not gonna invest? Like you want to almost have the energy of like, with or without you,
this is going.
We're good. We're gonna continue on. And not everyone invested, and that's fine. But I think it's really important, like, to say, hey, we're closing this raise in this 2-week frame, and really like keep it nice and tight, so that you're not like, just like dating. It's like, hey, I expect a ring in a year. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't give too much space. Don't give too much time. So I think that's also really important as well.
It's so important that you highlighted that. I think for us, we closed our raise in 3 weeks. Right?
Yeah.
I think it was quite fast at the time. But the idea was, hey, this is a hot thing that's going. We've already closed. Leverage is such a huge thing when you're going into this situation. I remember there was one VC we were talking to, and he had said something slick during the call. And I remember just saying something slick back. And I could tell later on when they were telling us that they were investing, he was saying, you saying that was also what convinced me to invest, because you weren't desperate. You definitely were moving like you didn't need us, which we didn't. But there was a sense of, how do I put this? This is such a psychological thing, right? When you come across as desperate and you need them, like, I would say VCs are in a way masochists.
Yeah,
right?
they don't want that.
They don't want that. Like, sometimes disrespect them if you have to. I'm being serious. Like, it's like they are masochists in a way where it's like, look, if you come across confident, I'm not saying just go disrespect, but I mean that in a very nuanced fashion.
Yeah.
Come across confident, come across secure, come across like this is not how you want to go and feed your family. Like you're already settled. And then somebody can trust you with money because they don't feel like, hey, he's going to take this money to then go start throwing lavish parties or go and buy boats or go and buy the biggest cars. You know what I mean? It's like, you're still a custodian of capital. They need to be able to trust that this money I'm giving you, you're not going to go piss it all away and never actually build anything, right? So that is something founders should also keep in mind too.
Yeah, and it's so funny because I feel like recently, I'm not even on Twitter like that anymore, but I remember seeing some tweets where some investors were like, yeah, like if I see you wearing a certain type of watch or I see you roll up in a range, it's like, okay, like, is my money actually going to be put to work, or are you going to just be using this as a lifestyle? And we've seen recently lots of different fraud cases, right? Lots of situations where someone used to chop that money in a different country, right? Yeah. And I think especially, like, unfortunately, like, let's be honest, if you are an African founder, if you're a Nigerian founder and you're trying to raise capital in other parts of the world, there's already this bar already that they're like, oh, scam, this and that. So I think you have to really do your best to be able to showcase that you're going to be responsible with the money, you're going to execute with the money, and you're not using this money in order to japa as well.
No, it's very important. And I think one thing a lot of those founders don't understand is the game we're in is a game where you are in the arena. You can fail. Everybody understands that. But what you can never do is scam and misrepresent and run off with people's money, because that will be the last time you can ever come back to raise. So people don't, I think sometimes when I hear some of these cases, I'm like, it's not properly weighted. You're not weighting the reputational risk that will follow you for the rest of your life versus this one time, like maybe you stole $1 million or 50 million or whatever. It's like, cool. But that, like, for the rest of your life, you know that nobody will ever be able to vouch for you because you did this. So I would say, as founders, please weigh these decisions before you even, I would actually say don't do it, right? You take someone's money, handle it with care. As long as you can show that you tried your best and you did your best to execute. And investors know this, right? So like I said, 98% of startups fail.
Yeah.
A lot of that money goes to zero. It's why it's called venture capitalist. You don't want to know how many times I've written angel checks where as soon as I send that money out, I already know I've made peace and this money is not coming back. And if it comes back, I'm like, oh, hallelujah, God is good. But if it doesn't, I've unattached myself to the outcome, right? And I think people also need to understand that, right? And a lot of the VCs, the way it works is one company can return their entire fund. I think we just saw that with Figma, right? Like, I think a lot of the first investors in Figma returned their whole fund just from that one check. This is a model that's already baked in to a fundraise or to your fundraising. The VC knows I'm writing you this check and I'm hoping that you will return my entire thing. But even if you don't, I already have other people I'm betting on too. So sometimes for a lot of startups, you've already been written down, right? Because you're not showing that much traction. Nothing is working out. Have an honest conversation with your investors and let them know, like, okay, do you need to pivot? Like, you will pivot to die as a founder. God, like, you will pivot so much you could be a ballet dancer for real, because this game requires you to be deft, to be active, to understand what's going on. And sometimes your win or your product market fit can come from something you didn't even expect. But that's why you also have to stay alive long enough to be able to pivot. You've already started and failed at startups before. What did those failures teach you about fundraising?
Okay. So I think I have two big lessons that I learned from TalentBase, right? So number one, and this is more because I came in after it already started. So I was a CEO, I inherited what happened. And this is quite common, right? Where founders will raise capital, they'll start the business, and then they bring in people to operate and execute on the business itself. The constitution of the board is so important. And people don't understand that is a difference a lot of times as well as you moving forward or not. Unfortunately, the board was constituted before I entered in there. And so it started becoming an issue when I was looking to raise more capital after my time at 500 startups. It wasn't aligned to the CEO. I'm not going to expand too much more on that, but I think it's really important. Like a lot of times when founders start companies, and especially because in Nigeria, we're very into boards. And so we're quick to like start a board, and people don't understand that same board can remove you. That same board may not be for you. That same board can block you literally from fundraising. So it's really important that when you are starting a company and you're doing fundraising, don't be quick to start a board. Have that board happen when certain things have happened. Maybe you've hit certain milestones, and the board should be people that help you fill in the gaps of things you don't have, and people that you can rely on and ask real questions. And like I said, it's really important that they're actually aligned to the long term of the startup. I think for me, the board wasn't aligned in that way, so it made it very difficult for me to fundraise. I think the other thing as well, and we talked about this earlier, is the team, right? Mm-hmm. And people really don't understand. I have to emphasize this. Having your founding team, it is literally like a marriage. Co-founders, it's marriage. You're in it for 5, 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. And you have to be able to do conflict resolution. It's so important that you're able to have real, honest conversations. I know for TalentBase, that was a huge issue. At some point, the founder and me as a CEO, we were not aligned, right? There were things that were not clarified. There were things that were not, I think the honest conversations I was trying to have, again, I was young, I was naive, I was in my 20s. This was early days when I moved back to Nigeria. we didn't have certain type of conversations. And so literally I was about to close $1 million fundraise for TalentBase, and the founder blocked it behind my back. Okay. That was the point. And luckily for me, how I found this out was actually an investor who like called me quietly, was like, I don't know what's going on with your startup, but you got to go and fix it. And that was why I eventually ended up leaving, because there wasn't alignment. So I think it's so important as co-founders that at all times you have conversations. Maybe it's once a quarter, maybe it's every half a year, where you're like, are we still aligned? How are we doing? Yeah, check in. And we do it all the time. We check in and we have real honest conversations like, hey, you checked out. Hey, I need you back in the game. Hey, where's your head at? Like, it's so important to really have these conversations, because if you do not, you're not going to survive. And I know for TalentBase, it was not because we didn't find product market fit. In fact, what's actually insane to me is the person that was going to write the check so that we could continue running TalentBase, obviously that didn't work. And he went on to write a check for a different HR startup like years later. So clearly they were interested in HR software. So I know the breakdown TalentBase was due to the team. And so that's why it's really, really important that you have all those things aligned and you're consistently checking in.
I think, again, I cannot stress it. Like, you've already stressed it enough, but self-awareness is important in your co-founding team. I know these days there's this whole debate between should you be a solo founder versus a co-founder. In my opinion, I vote for co-founder, because I know that there are days when I'm not 100% and you're the one who's literally holding the ball. There are days when you're not 100% and I'm the one who's holding the ball. And sometimes it's not just 2 co-founders. It could be 2, 3, 4, even 5 co-founders. There are examples of that. That's why when you're thinking about your team construct from the beginning, you need to be able to say to yourself, if we have PayPal, I think had like 4 or 5 co-founders, right? And they were still all able to exit and even add an Elon when they merged to now become another co-founder too. So there are examples there of, again, finding the right team. As long as you guys are out there to be able to execute very well, you can do it. I would also say the reason why this self-awareness thing is very important is it allows us to be able to have hard conversations where you might not like what I'm saying at the time, but when you go reflect on it, you can sleep on it. You can then come back and say, hey, this is what this person was trying to communicate to me. And they are aligned in, we both should never question that each other or both or all your co-founders have the best interest of the company at heart. You might disagree on how to get there, but you should never question the foundation of what do they believe is in the best interest of the company. That's another thing. The second thing is burnout. It's not something that people talk about a lot. In this journey of a startup, there will be times when a co-founder burns out. You need to be able to have that conversation from a place of honesty. I think founders out there, when you feel like you're going through burnout, and for some of us who were raised in this productivity matrix, you don't even know how to articulate to yourself like, hey, I'm going through burnout. You need to be able to come to the team or to your co-founders and say, I might need a break, right? And it's not, don't feel shame about it, because I feel like there's a lot of shame attached around this founder burnout thing. Communicate very clearly. Maybe I need a week or 2 or even 3 weeks break and I will be back, because it's better. You don't serve anyone, whether the company, whether your investors, when you're building while burnt out, because everybody can feel it. It literally drives down the energy factor of your startup. And most startups in the early days need energy, right? So if you're going through burnout, be able to communicate that with your co-founder. And I think the other side is, if you do decide to leave your startup, because again, when investors are betting on you, they're thinking you're going to be here for between minimum 5 years if you IPO or get acquired to 10, 15, 20 years. When you're deciding to leave your other co-founders or to leave your company, you need to be able to communicate that in a very clear way, that there's no confusion. And I would say, like, sometimes you sign a 4-year vesting, Cliff.
Yeah.
If you're in a situation where you've started something with someone and after 6 months, because there's usually a 1-year cliff, you say to yourself, a 1-year cliff is basically when you put one, like, if you leave within 1 year, you don't get any stock options or you don't get any shares. If you decide to leave within that year, just leave and not cause any drama, because I think what happens sometimes is folks want to leave and they know they've checked out, but they also want to still hold on to shares. That's not fair to either you or to the founding team that's still there and is still building, you know?
So let's talk about Afropolitan Day, like how we've had to make some pivots, because I know it's been a while since we've actually addressed the public.
Yeah. So we obviously laid out the 4 phases. I think phase 1 we executed. We launched 500 NFT passports, which we sold out of. To be honest, there's so many things that, like, I remember at the time, the day of the launch, I think the website crashed because there were so many people who were looking to
that buy. Was a nightmare.
And then we were up to like 4
a.m. in the morning.
Oh my God! But
manually sending links, manually getting people to buy. It was.
And so we launched that, and then phase 2, which was, you know, the Society as a Service, the super app, we were able to launch an MVP with AfroPass. We've been able to power events from Lagos to Nairobi to San Francisco to wherever, and then payments as well that's attached to it. We were also able to launch Legacy, which is our dating club, which actually came from demand from the community. I think dating has become such a huge pain point in our ecosystem and even in society in general, but I think the community was demanding that we do something around dating, and we launched Legacy, which is catering to high achieving members within our community. And then we have Convo. Convo is basically where folks can book one-on-one video sessions with in-demand experts. I do think, like, when I look back on all of it, there have been some challenges with each of the products. With the NFTs, I think when we first started, we were very technology heavy.
Yeah.
We led with crypto and led with technology. And even at the time, I believe in the technology, but you could tell something was not gelling because you had to over-explain yourself to people who didn't know anything about the technology. And I think since then, what I've learned is you cannot allow technology lead. Technology serves. Technology enables, but it cannot lead the vision, right? And I think that's one of the reasons we even came back to now relaunching the podcast, because you can't build a nation off just technology. You need people to buy into the storytelling. You need people to buy. You need a movement. You need believers, not users of your product. So thankfully, we've been able to make that pivot. AfroPass, I think, again, a good product, but maybe it was technology leading again. It's not to say that all of these products don't have a place. It's just to say, cement what you're about and who you're about with the people you want to be about it with your vision, with your values, and what you're about to go out there to achieve. And then when you launch these products, they're there to serve the community. And I think there's always this conflict between scale and maintaining the soul of what you're building. I would always say to any founder, when you find yourself having to make that decision, choose soul. Because there is a way in which you can scale while still maintaining the soul of what it is that you're building. Because so many times you scale and overscale to a point where you don't recognize yourself, what it is that you now have, your baby. And your baby is your startup, right? When you first start, you won't recognize what's happening. And then next thing you know, the meaning of why you started doing something has lost its source, right? So I think it's something where this year we're looking to like get back into why we started this, the meaning of it. And it's one of the reasons we love these stories we get to be able to share on the podcast, because it gets to show you what that sort of future looks like. Like, it's not something that's so far away. We have Afropolitans who sat on this couch, who've told their stories, and those stories allow us to act as an archive to really archive Black brilliance at scale, right? Or to show people like, this is who we are. This is what we are capable of doing. And we shouldn't, and it's sad that across Africa and even like around the world, that many Black people find ourselves in situations where we are not living in our best format, right? And we have to travel outside of our homes, leave our families, leave our friends to go out there to make it. And then when we then make it, there's this sense of like loss or like belonging that is never really catered to. And we all want to come home. But sometimes that difficulty in navigating coming back home is what's stopping us. So if we can create a world or a situation, which is what I think Afropolitan is doing, where we build this future that we deserve, and it's something that we can look back and say, you know what, Nigeria became like a Dubai. Nigeria became like a China. Nigeria became like a whatever country that's developed that wasn't always considered developed, right? And it's not just a Nigerian thing. It's just Africa in general. Like, we should be able to congregate with one another and, you know, build relationships that cut across different tribes and different ethnicities, you know?
Yeah, and I think also what people also don't understand is from when we fundraise, which was 2022 to 2025, which is just 3 years, a lot has changed, right? And, I keep emphasizing this because we're going to have an episode on AI, which is that has really changed everything. It's literally changed. Like right now when I'm reading the news, like I know you have subscription to information, so I'd be sneaking in and reading it. And honestly, all the tech news is focused on two markets. It's either who's building tech for creators and who's building tech with AI, and really nothing else is being built in between, right? And obviously there's still innovations that are happening in Africa that are being built, to solve our issues in solar energy and fintech and healthcare and some of these other things. But I think for us, we had to also pivot and ask ourselves, okay, tech is no longer going to be the moat, because literally people can now vibe code. Yeah. I saw a girl yesterday say she just used ChatGPT to build her own website, right? And so now we have to figure out what is going to be the moat when we're trying to build a digital nation, which is going to be distribution. And so that's also why this podcast is really important as well, because it's building this community. It's literally building a group of Afropolitans who are tuning in. They're getting the information, and also it's creating networks, right? Because once we start doing live events and networking and even investors, right, which is all I think part of what we're trying to build, I think it's going to build into the future that we said we're going to do. So I think people don't understand how instrumental this media piece is really key to linking everything together.
Yeah, again, storytelling, right? You have to, I think some people at the time like, oh, you guys just love telling stories. Storytelling is important. It's always been important. The reason why a book like the Bible has stayed throughout the ages, it's storytelling as well, apart from the wisdom you get from it, or even the Quran. These books have stories. Stories are things that can be taken across different ages, different times, even like in our own African traditions, oral traditions, right? So storytelling will always matter. And I think founders who don't think it matters, it always boggles me, because you have to understand it from an investor's perspective. They get 1,000 pitches every day. Why yours? How are you going to stand out from the whole crowd? And if they're getting 1,000 pitches every day and you're coming in there and telling them something they've heard like 1,000 times, you're not standing out. They need a story. And sometimes that story doesn't have to be as grand as like what we said we pitched with. It can be your own story. It could be a story that's tied directly to you. Maybe you lost a loved one, or, you overcame something. Tie all of that in, because it gives them a perspective of who you are as the founder who's coming there to get a check from them to go build your vision.
Yeah, so I really feel like we went through all the different details of fundraising, how to pitch, how to structure, I think the elements of what a pitch looks like, and just being able to also network and being able to build those relationships and what it looks like to either pitch an idea and traction. And so I think we're going to wrap it up here. Yeah. You have any other last thoughts?
I was thinking, like, I wonder if it would serve people to see like the pitch deck that we raised with, or even the memo. I mean, it's been a couple of years now. It's not like we still need it, but I think we can discuss. But if you guys actually want to see the pitch deck or the memo we raised with, let us know in the comments and we can put it up.
Okay.
All right.